So it's going to be intense fighting in Rafah. This is not going to be small skirmishes. This will look like a war. It will feel like a war. It will very likely engage the air power of the Israeli Air Force. It certainly will engage the power and firepower of the Israeli artillery, and of course the Israeli infantry and the Israeli special forces. But it comes with a series of difficult dilemmas that may start to play out in real time, depending on how close to the Hamas leadership the IDF is able to come. For example, will the leadership of Hamas seek to stop that offensive by the IDF, perhaps by executing hostages? It's not something that people want to think about out loud, but it's something that absolutely has to be considered. And how will the Israel Defense Forces and the Israeli government respond if that does turn out to be the case? We've recently seen the release of surviving hostages inside the Gaza Strip on video. We've seen them released by Hamas for their propaganda aims. Those have been very jarring to the Israeli home front, although I can tell you the overarching result of those videos has been not to deter Israel from moving forward inside the Gaza Strip, but rather to encourage the Israeli people behind the idea that our hostages are still alive and therefore must be rescued and released from the clutches of Hamas. So one of the reasons that you're seeing this feverish effort for a deal to be done, other than the obvious, is that this major operation by the Israel Defense Forces is going to be in the area of Rafah, which is the city that is adjacent to the Rafah crossing. The Rafah crossing, of course, abuts the Sinai Peninsula, which is sovereign Egyptian territory. Egypt has a very, very deep concern behind the idea that the Gazan population will be moved from the area of Rafah into the Sinai Peninsula, which is something that the Egyptians want to avoid. And as a consequence of that, they are now leveraging as much pressure as they're able to on Hamas in order to see the hostages released. Now, the stages of the hostage release are quite complex and very complicated. Israel, in a previous round, was seeking to have 40 hostages released. It's now reduced that number to 33. Hamas wants to see aerial surveillance stopped by the Israelis for 8 hours per day, 10 hours per day on days when hostages are released. But ultimately, what I think people need to realize and understand is that Sinwar wants one thing above all. He wants to see an end to the war. He will take such an outcome as a victory. He will propagandize it as a victory, falsely so. And he will express, by way of that, that jihadism has survived. It can survive any onslaught by any enemy, certainly any Western enemy, certainly the Zionist enemy, as he would term it. And without him receiving assurances that a release of the hostages will result in an end of hostilities, it's unlikely that we're going to see them released by way of a deal. Much more likely is that there will have to be some sort of military resolution to this crisis. What that resolution will look like precisely is unknown, obviously.